Thanks everyone for coming, and I really appreciate the invitation to speak here. So my name is David Lister, and I've been brought on as a power user to test MSEP and try to build structures and provide feedback for what's needed to build mechanical systems. And before I go into that though, I just may as well introduce myself and give a bit of background. So I was one of those odd students that decided to play CAD like it was a video game starting in grade 8. And then also built a computer, Minecraft, in grade 10 that got me my first engineering job. And these sort of skills led me to win the national skills competition a couple times for mechanical CAD, and I'm actually now chairing that competition. And I went on to do engineering physics, which is basically a double major between electrical engineering and physics, is the variety I took. And after that, went to work for CBN Nanotechnologies for 3 years with various people in this room. It was a really great experience, but it led me to want to learn a lot more theory, so now I'm working on my PhD in physics, looking at crystal growth and characterization. And so the motivation to join MSEP is actually in many ways rooted to this gamification aspect. I've long thought that engineering software is fun and could be made more fun if it was approached to like a game, and I've long wondered why we don't use game engines and why we don't integrate those two, although history has a lot to say about that. Also, I think MSEP could have a really significant impact in bringing nanotechnology forward, because there's a really big gap right now. There's no good tool to design molecular machines end to end. You have a piecemeal chain of program scripts. You have to compile in Linux here, and there's a large skill set needed to actually do molecular machine engineering with the currently available tools. And because of this, there's very few designs in the public domain that are newer than 20 years old. And if there's very few designs, what are the experimentalists going to target? They're going to target these 20-year-old designs of a relatively small design space. And we have lost opportunity because we don't even know what we're missing as potential targets at the moment. And so I think MSEP does a really good job of being open and accessible to fill that niche. And so this is what it looks like when you open MSEP. So, and this is real time, by the way. So you can place some carbon atoms, drag them to create new atoms with bonds. You can rotate your view. You can create new bonds. And here I'm building an adamantine cage, which is sort of the base unit of cubic diamond. You can add hydrogen atoms, which are needed to saturate unsatisfied bonds. You can go and you can minimize the energy using what we call relax. Basically, you get rid of any net force on any atoms. And then you can go into tab and click run on molecular dynamics, and it goes. For small structures like this is what real time looks like. And within 2 minutes, you can have something running. There's no installation, you literally just open the executable. It's way easier than having to read the documentation, compile things, email a mailing list when it doesn't build, and you have this obtuse error message that no one really understands but the software developers. It's a really great experience, and it's cross-platform too. So Windows, Linux, Mac, they all work. And so you can also change the view representation. So I showed van der Waals spheres, and these show what the effective size-ish of what an atom is, and it really helps visualize machines when you're trying to fit them, whereas the ball and stick view is really a lot better if you're trying to actually design the nanostructure you're looking at. So what is the molecular machine design process? And so for the rest of the talk, I'll be actually going through an example of design, but it's worth talking about at a high level what the differences between molecular machine design are and other forms of engineering and design and chemistry. Because molecular machine design is really unique. It's not mechanical engineering, although it shares a lot of aspects from mechanical engineering, and it's not chemistry in the same way because chemists don't think of structures in the how they interact mechanistically to form mechanisms, at least. And so because your parts are on the similar size scale as your bond length, you are very confined to the crystal lattice, and the underlying nanostructure is highly constraining as to what you can build. This is very different than a bulk material where you can just carve any shape you'd like. The surfaces also matter a lot because of the surface area to volume ratio. You also have to passivate dangling bonds. So you can see these yellow atoms, they're hydrogen, and the purple atoms, they're carbon. And so they're shaking, and they're also shaking because you have thermal motion. And so this simulation right now you're looking at is at 300 degrees Kelvin, so room temperature. And so you have the shaking quantized thing that also happens to be very flexible. So when you're designing at this scale, you can intuitively picture the stiffness of diamond as about rubber. And this just has to do with the scaling properties of stiffness as you go down in scale. And so you're designing these jiggly, sticky due to van der Waals forces, objects with weird surfaces and quantized dimensions. It's a very different set of constraints than normal mechanical engineering. However, you still have a similar process of design or plan, build, do some simulations, and repeat. However, with molecular machine design as a new field, there's a lot of repeating, a lot more than normally. And right now, you can do this, but each tool, again, is a separate thing you have to install, understand, learn. Sometimes you have to learn programming languages just to use the tool. And MSEP gets rid of a lot of those barriers, or basically all of them. So I'm going to now walk you through the start of a design for a set of gears. And as I mentioned, the crystalline structure we use is really, really important. So on the top here, you can see there's two cages. The one on the left is cubic diamond. That's the diamond that we're used to seeing. So you have effectively 4 planes of 6-member rings, 10 total atoms. On the right, you have hexagonal diamond. This is also known as Lonsdaleite. It doesn't really exist naturally, just due to thermodynamic differences. And it has parallel top and bottom planes with 3 sort of hexagonal side faces. And even though they only have a 2-atom difference in the cage, they have very different properties mechanically as building tools. So cubic diamond likes to make these pyramids. It's really hard to make a structure where the top and bottom are parallel and you have right angle sides. Whereas hexagonal diamond, you can just extrude it due to the parallel top and bottom face. And so they're very different when you go to build things. And their symmetries too, they're similar, but again, there's subtle differences that have significant impacts later on in the design. So for the gear, it makes sense to use something we can extrude. So I'll be using hexagonal diamond, and we get a structure that looks like this. So this, you can see, is a gear tooth. We have red atoms here for oxygen and blue atoms for nitrogen. This is so that they satisfy, or oxygen only needs 2 bonds, nitrogen 3, which allows us to avoid having these pesky hydrogen atoms on the surface affecting our sliding motion. We zoom out, we can repeat this. Not actually 6 times because it's 3-fold symmetric, so you can see the edges of the teeth are blue and red in alternating fashion. So there's actually 2 slightly different teeth repeated with 3-fold symmetry. And you can make a gear. This is really, really cool. But you can only really make a 6-sided, or 6, 12, 3, which doesn't really make sense, a tooth gear because of the symmetries. How would you make a 7-tooth gear with this approach? It's very, very hard, and you wouldn't really have a nice symmetric structure. And so this is, again, one of those big differences from bulk solids that you would never get if you were just trying to do a nanomachine design in SolidWorks or other CAD packages. You'd never actually realize that this microstructure is significant and makes what could be trivial differences actually a very challenging one. There are ways, though, that you can do 7-tooth gears, and I'll be alluding to a way later on. But next, the gear needs a shaft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude a shaft out the middle of the gear using hexagonal diamond, and then I'm going to cap the ends using cubic diamond. And cubic diamond likes to make these tapered points. So that's perfect. I can make sort of 2 tapered points that will fit within cupped jewel bearings, allowing the gear to rotate. And again, I use oxygen and nitrogen to avoid the hydrogen atoms on the surface dangling and affecting the motion. And you can see, zooming around, we have a nice little cone at the end of that shaft. Zooming out, you can see we have the same structure repeated on the other side, and we have a gear effectively with a shaft and some ends that are going to allow us to build some bearings. But the bearings, they're a lot more challenging. And they're a lot more challenging because of the symmetries involved. How do you make a round structure out of these hexagonal cells? And the answer is you can't. You have to kind of make your own cell and force the thing to bend. And so you'll see here that there's 5-member rings, there's some 7-member rings, and there's this really weird non-standard structure, and the chemists in the room might be cringing. The chemical validity has not been verified for this. But you have to design these strange structures to allow yourself to go and bend in a circle. And so this is the repeat unit of a 13-fold symmetry bearing that we're going to pattern and form the inside. And so those blue atoms, again, nitrogen to avoid dangling hydrogen, and they're going to form the inside of our conical sort of jewel bearing, as you'll see right there. It's a very complicated structure now. Once you repeat it, it's kind of hard to interpret the patterns. But you can see from this angle, there's a bit of a cone shape to it. So we can now assemble. So MSEP allows you to group atoms together to allow you to move them without ripping the bonds apart. And you can rotate. There's convenient snapping tools, and copy-paste, of course, works. You can align things, change the view. And again, this is all real time. It takes literally a minute to go from a single gear and a single bearing to what's going to become a pair of gears meshing together. And it could be repeated multiple times. The process is also made a lot easier with the van der Waals representation of the size of the atoms, which is different than the ball and stick representation I had before. And that lets me sort of tune the size of the gears so it looks like it's going to mesh properly. And yeah, we've now got a pair of gears meshing together. And it'd be very easy to continue copying this to make a gear train. But for the sake of simulation speed, we only really need these two. And so now we can go simulate it. But there's a few steps to do before you can actually simulate with a spinning gear. And this is because there's residual energy stored in the strain of the bonds. And there's no certainty that I actually designed with a low strain structure to begin with. It's almost certain that I didn't. And so you want to minimize the energy first. But even when you minimize the energy to get rid of net force, you can have a local minima where once you move the structure a little bit, something snaps and releases a bunch of energy, ruining your simulation. So really the better way to do it is to anneal. And the way you can anneal an MSEP right now is you do one simulation at a high temperature, say 1,000 Kelvin, let it shake for a bit, and then at the end of the simulation, you take that state and you set your temperature to 0. And then you suck the energy out of the system, and it's effectively minimizing again. And you can see that when I start the animation. And it goes pretty quick, but you'll notice the atoms are going to jiggle a lot at the top, and the bearings are going to compress and sort of find their natural seating position. And as the structure comes to the state that we want to do for the mechanical simulation. The other thing we'll do, which isn't shown, is you can add a motor in MSEP to the gear. So I'll be adding a motor to the right gear. And you can lock atoms or anchor atoms in various different ways. And so in this, I'll be anchoring 3 atoms in each of the bearings. That way they don't rotate and they stay where they should be, because I'm not trying to simulate the whole machine. I just want to focus on the gears and the bearings and see if it works. And so this is the final result. It took a little while to simulate this, but it was doable in a day. And this is the simulation. So it starts still 70 degrees Kelvin, and we start meshing the gear. The speed ramps up to, I forget, a few hundred gigahertz. So very, 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 very fast. This is probably a non-physical speed if you were to simulate a real machine, but in the interest of simulation time, you want to simulate it in a sane period. And if your machine works at an absurd speed, it's probably going to work at a slow speed, but not the other way around. And so,
is the reason why it's like rubber, because you simulate it so fast?
Pardon? Oh, like rubber? You can still get rubbery things for small deflections. Van der Waals itself, the force of that is enough to deflect diamonds. So it does not necessarily speed effects that cause the rubberiness. It's just even quasi-static motions can produce a lot of rubber. And you'll see here that the gears are not perfect. There's the 2 gear faces, they kind of click together like 2 egg cartons, and they produce this torsional motion. My gears are not great, and this is the whole reason you repeat. So we need add later more analysis tools, but just even looking at it visually, you can get a good understanding. So if I was to do this again, you could compress the bearings, maybe add a bit more preload, fix the gear surfaces so they slide more smoothly against each other. This is just version 1, well, actually 21 of a of a design, but there's a lot more that could be done with this. But to put in context, this is not a nanofactory like the famous 20-year-old nanofactory animation. But this could be used as a key part, an actuator or an aspect of a bigger system. But to do bigger systems, we need libraries because it takes a lot of time to design things. We have to place a lot of atoms, test it. It's a long process. And so this is why having a community around MSEP and having it an open platform is going to be so great. It allows us to increase the scale of the assemblies we can produce. Also in the roadmap is increasing the efficiency of large-scale simulations, which should also help with designing or simulating something so big. And MSEP is really in an analogous state. So the 2 gears are just 2 gears. They don't even reduce the speed. But they're a first machine. It's a really good step to demonstrate that MSEP is quite feature complete for such an early stage in its long cycle or planned cycle. Similar state to the nanofactory. We're nowhere there yet, but eventually. It takes a few steps first. And so to end, I'll just sort of talk about the future and different features. So I think this is really good as a starting place. You can do small molecular machines and you can simulate them. And you can get up and running tonight if you feel inspired. It takes very, very little time to just download and click. Oh, I see someone's already opened the bearing and is running something on their laptop. That's awesome. But there's a lot still to do. So right now, all those atoms are placed by hand. Having more automation tools to help speed that up go a really long way. The other thing is, I'd love to interface with a wider variety of simulation tools. I'd love to be able to do quantum simulations, and as well as large-scale coarse-grained models, so you can span the fine range. For all I know, my gears could be chemically reacting when they mesh. There's a lot of things to verify at many aspects of the scale. And then also building a community around this. So if you have challenges, collaboration, you can work on a shared design, and you can also share design techniques. And so notice how the bearing sort of used this interesting strain technique, and the carving of hexagonal diamond was another technique. There's a lot of techniques that we don't even know about with molecular machine design that really would be valuable to have in the public domain. And so having more people inventing new ways to build things and sharing those with the broader community can only be beneficial to the nanotechnology community and helping us get there sooner. And so everyone really has the opportunity to make a significant impact in nanotechnology, even if they don't have a lab in their basement. And so this is a really interesting and accessible way to design things. And I look forward to seeing how it grows and what people build with it. And with that, I'll pass it back to Eric for wrapping up. Thank you.